5, Chapter 2, Parts 1 and 2. Chapter 2, Dawn of War, Part 1, Genova Town, Deimos Peninsula, Kronus. Before I could start cleaning up all the blood and gore covering me, I found myself picked up as if I was a small child and staring at the glowing eyes of Antius's helmet. I could feel him probing me through the warp, no doubt searching for any sign of chaos taint. If he found any, I was a goner. Needless to say, that made me damn nervous. "Huh, you're clean," the librarian muttered and carefully put me down. I sighed in relief. "You sure?" one of the braver or dumber troopers asked aloud. Antius turned with dexterity, belittling his bulk, and stared at the soldier. No more taint than any space marine who faced chaos up close and personal. The giant rumbled. "Well, that's a relief. Lieutenant, we have an Inquisitor to save. Let's move, people." I paused and glared at the offal covering me. "Where's my damned rag?" "Form up. Ellen, your squad stays with the Chimeras, the rest with me. Alpha on point," Picos ordered. "On foot or mounted?" she asked and pointed at the target building. "Here, sir." Santos gave me the cloak of the man I shot at the start of the current unpleasantries. "Thanks, that should do," I muttered and started cleaning up. "Foot, APCs will provide cover if needed." I paused. "Belay that," I shouted a moment later. "Call HQ and have them check about building schematics and defenses. There might be records in the capital. There's no sense to get shredded in the open by sentry turrets or something." I pointed at the librarian. "He probably can take anything they could dish out, but the rest of us are much squishier." "That's actually prudent, considering," Antius rumbled. "A teeny bit better than I would expect from a greener than grass-fresh scholar graduate anyway. The backup will be down in a few minutes." The Space Marine continued. "You know your words do wonders for my self-esteem." I snarked back. "You've got the guts to talk back to me, don't you?" The smile was clear in his voice. That, however, demonstrates a startling lack of brains, or at least good judgment. "Lieutenant, get that small hill scanned." Antius pointed at the slight rise, partially hiding the plaza from the Arbiter's HQ. "Right away, my lord." The LT snapped a salute and started issuing the relevant orders. "Nasty surprises?" I asked, while trying to remove a piece of, was that a jaw, from my belt? If it was me, I would have at least mined this side to ruin the day of anyone who thought the hill would provide good cover. "Just mines?" I inquired. I could feel a tiny, very tiny bit of approval radiating from the Astartes. "Of course not," Antius growled. "Sentry turrets, indirect fire, redundant sensor net. It would be best if the hill was simply a cover for a nice adamantite-plated bunker chock full with nice toys and murderous bastards. Nice image, if they're on our side. A bit of fun otherwise." The librarian nodded sagely. It sounded like it was from personal experience. Who was I kidding? Of course it was. He was likely hundreds of years old super soldier who had seen campaigns all across the galaxy. "Any other advice for a newbie like me?" I asked. While we had a bit of quiet, it dawned on me that picking up his brain for ways to keep myself alive might be prudent. That and keeping him between myself and whatever nasty thing tried to eviscerate me the next time. "We don't have a decade to spare." Antius deadpanned. "How did you retain or get a sense of humor?" I asked. I was almost done with mopping up brains and viscera off me. Note to self, try to avoid cutting apart heretics with a chain blade and shoot them instead, preferably from safe distance. The stench of blood was becoming a bit nauseating. "Well, most of my brothers think me a bit strange." The librarian somehow shrugged in his armor in such a way that the suit actually made a half-decent facsimile of the gesture. "While they're decent guys mostly, they tend to be a bit, how to put it, stiff?" Auntie sighed. I gave him a weird look. He was nothing like I was taught about the Adeptus Astartes. Oh, he was a superhuman killing machine, something the man amply demonstrated just a few minutes ago. His soul was the grandest one I felt besides the Emperor's, something that put him high above the rest of us mortals. Yet despite that, right here and now he felt oddly human, and I found that more reassuring than I could properly describe. "Tips. Let's see. Don't get killed, duh." The librarian nodded, making me smirk. "Even I think that's obvious." "Many don't." Antius sounded less than pleased with whatever memory my quip brought up. So don't get killed unless it serves the Emperor and humanity best in the situation. More importantly, see the latter and don't get your men killed unless it's absolutely necessary to get the job done. The Emperor can use live soldiers better than a bunch of very dead martyrs. Yep, I definitely liked him. The troopers who could overhear us apparently shared the sentiment. Even with my warp senses clamped shut, I could feel their spirits rising up a bit as they heard our conversation, something that I'm sure wasn't lost to the Space Marine. Let's sum it up. Don't die like imbeciles. Consider that a standing order. Antaeus continued. The next simple thing for dummies like you. A giant armored hand rested on my shoulder. Charging Emperor-damned heretics like a crazy cornate berserker when you aren't wearing a power armor like you just did is a great way to die like an imbecile. So don't do that if there's another way. Like ever, or just spare us all the embarrassment of working with you and get your head blown right away. I won't hear the end of this, would I? I moaned. You made not too terrible impersonation of a cornate cultist. If I wasn't a reasonable man, I would have vented your brains just in case. Or for sport. Antaeus spoke in a serious tone that sent shivers down my spine. The librarian's head snapped up and he pointed at the dark sky. They're here. I looked up and could spot a pair of fast-approaching fireballs which appeared to be aiming straight at us. They know that they're friendlies in the area, right? I asked. They should. Antaeus nodded. Everyone, kiss the ground, the librarian shouted in a voice that reverberated in my bones. I wasted no time in following his bellowed instruction and dived into the short grass next. A few moments later, the world ended in a bass roar and twin hammer blows that shook me to the impression was reinforced by a rain of smoking debris that started impacting all around us. The cavalry just arrived and almost killed us in the process. This rescue mission was getting better and better, and we were yet to meet the real enemy. Part 2. Genova Town, Deimos Peninsula. Kronus. I got up and shook myself of the loose earth covering me. Well, that was a bit close for comfort, I muttered. Brother Antaeus, orders, sir. A deep bass voice rumbled from behind me. I glanced over my shoulder to see 8 crimson giants carrying enough weapons to win a battle or two by themselves, standard bolters, a missile launcher, heavy melter, and a heavy bolter. Then there were a lot of grenades and other nice stuff that went boom. Each of them had to be at least 220 high, and that was before they got in the power armor. They made the rest of us look like little children. Brother Sergeant Went, the librarian greeted. Traitors hold in the Arbiter HQ. Unknown defenses. The guard is trying to find us building schematics. The enemy possibly has the Lord Inquisitor still alive somewhere in the building. Purge the traitors and recover him if he's still alive. We'll provide support. Affirmative. Naught, scan the area. Lorne, I want an AP missile ready. Kelso, you're blowing up any obstacles. Went started issuing orders aloud. Are you ready? He turned his attention at me. Yes. I answered simply. Raging at 8 Astartes after they perhaps not so accidentally got you killed was hazardous to one's health. Good. Follow us and try to keep up. Can we proceed, sir? Went asked. Move in, Antaeus ordered. That was enough. The Astartes suddenly accelerated faster than a speeding chimera. They were almost a blur as they ascended the hill and charged the Arbiter's HQ. What are you waiting for? I snapped at the guardsman and drew my sword, hoping that whatever defended our target would be too busy with the Marines to shoot at us squishy normal men and women. A moment later, I started running after the Astartes. Antaeus shook his head and simply strode beside me, not bothering to even jog. Went has always been a bit on the eager side, the librarian muttered. Didn't you just tell me not to charge the enemy in the open? Without proper power armor. Antaeus deadpanned. He lit up with purple fire and made a throwing gesture. A forked lighting detached from his armored glove, arched over the advancing space marines and struck a pair of bolter turrets that appeared from the wall of the HQ. The warp attack fried the defensive emplacements before they could even try seeking targets. Almost in the same instant, the rest of the Astartes opened fire. The deafening sound of bolters firing was almost like a fireskull blow. The Marines obviously had no problem hitting their targets, despite their sprint, because their rounds were tearing apart the Arbiter's defenses before they could properly come online. I shook my head in disbelief. I knew they were incredible warriors, but they were taking out targets that weren't there a split second ago before I could properly register the emplacements appearing all over the HQ's facade. I was almost sure that this was the case for most guardsmen as well. I knew that I wouldn't be able to react at anything approaching such reaction speed without a liberal dose of warp enhancements, and even then it was going to be very, very hard to compete with such reaction times. That really made me see the dangers of my chosen line of work. Because I knew that as great as the Emera's Angels of Death were, there were many, many enemies that could match them in combat ability. As an initiate in the Ordo Xenos, I was supposed to be hunting a lot of those things too. Lucky me. All that ran through my head as I sprinted after the armored titans, hoping to clear the open ground before some enterprising traitor tried to snipe me or something. To make matters worse, right now I didn't feel confident enough to draw on the warp and enhance myself, and thus getting better chances at surviving. After all, there were worse things than dying for the Emperor, like fucking up by the numbers and becoming a demon's newest toy. With the state of the warp right now, that latter was too likely for comfort. Behind me, the platoon crested the hill and charged after us, giving various war cries. I hoped that the mech element would arrive soon too, because the Chimeras combining their firepower with the Astartes were almost guaranteed to get us through the killing ground. They better get in place soon too. The emplacements were getting online faster and faster, and soon there would be more than the Marines could take out. Or the Angels of Death would reach the building and start storming it, probably leaving the rest of us get torn to shreds. You got to love the geniuses that issued conflicting orders to the Marines and Guard. A turret popped up and it wasn't immediately blown up. It survived long enough to aim and sent a burst at the leading Marine before being silenced. 3 spears of coherent light harmlessly splashed over his chest plate. Fortunately, it was just a standard LAS emplacement, instead of another bolter, because even Astartes' armor might have failed to a burst of high-caliber bolter rounds, especially at that range. Then the Chimeras finally got into position and added their heavy weapons to the onslaught. Just in time, too, the Marines reached the heavy doors and one of them pulled a charge from his backpack, while the rest took positions to the side. That, in turn, cut their firing arcs, allowing turrets to appear with impunity. "Odd section covering fire," Picos shouted. A moment later, red beams lanced from behind me and started impacting the HQ. In the meantime, Antaeus moved faster and got between me and the building. I grinned like a loon. His bulk made for a great mobile cover, especially after the waved a hand and summoned a spherical shield made of purple energy. "Try not to die yet, kid," the librarian shouted, then unleashed another lighting strike upon the HQ's defenses. A flash of light and a sound like ringing gong announced the Astartes taking care of the door. I heard someone screaming in pain from behind, but didn't bother looking back and just kept running after Antaeus. A few seconds later, the building was towering above us. Turrets were taking pot shots at us, but their ordnance detonated harmlessly upon Antaeus' shield. Bursts of heavy bolter fire and grenades was racking the facade, shattering its murals and taking out emplacement after emplacement. Then the librarian leaned forward and went through a ragged, glowing hole blasted into the main entrance. I didn't think, but dived in after him. A huge arm dragged me up to my feet. "You in one piece?" Antaeus asked. I simply nodded, trying to catch my breath. "Good, come on, we have an Inquisitor to find." "What about the Guard?" I rasped. "I sent one squad back to give them cover. I'll have a chat with Went once we're somewhere secure." The librarian growled. 6, Chapter 2, Part 3. Chapter 2, Dawn of War. Part 3, Arbiter's HQ, Genova Town. Kronus said, "You know, I expected that we would have to fight our way through the whole damn building," I muttered. "That would have been a prudent stalling tactic, or just blowing us all up." Antaeus was a bright ray of sunshine once again. That too. I glanced at the plain metal walls surrounding us as we made our way down to the holding cells and interrogation rooms. Went's squad led the way, and so far, with the sole exception of 2 choke points that were protected only by automated defenses, we hadn't faced anything of note. It's too damn quiet. I can't sense what's below us. No taint, but Antaeus trailed off. I took him at his word. Usually the things that could block a psyker's warp senses weren't healthy, or there were more than a few ways to pull it off, but I doubted that we would be lucky enough for this to be one of the nicer options. "Where are all the Arbiters?" Santos, who was shadowing me, asked aloud. "There should be enough of them to slow us down a bit." Antaeus hummed. The sound came out of his helmet, strangely distorted, almost eerie. "No matter where they are, it can't be good for us." "It never is. Chaos tend to work that way, when they aren't busy screwing each other." "Too much information." Santos groaned. The rest of the troopers wisely didn't touch the topic with a 10-foot pole, which in itself was surprising. My temporarily bodyguards were a strange bunch. In front of us, the Marines opened fire before Whent helpfully shouted, "Contact!" The sound of bolters discharging within the building was outright deafening. Within moments, the only thing I could hear was the roar of the weapons. The fact that all I could see was Antaeus' power pack that was attached to his back didn't help matters. Whatever decided to be shot up by the Astartes didn't even slow down their progress, and a few seconds later we were passing through a doorframe. The old-fashioned door it belonged to laid twisted in the middle of a large room. By the look of it, it had been tackled and trampled by a space marine. The poor bastard that had been apparently bracing the door was in even worse condition, though he was mostly intact, even if his chest made a good impression of pancake. The other 10 or traitorous arbiters strewn all around the room weren't so lucky. They made a great visual aid on the effectiveness of bolter rounds, and let's leave it at that. Did you know that a bolter blowing up your guts makes a worse mess than if you did the same with a chainsword? For some reason, part of me was finding the carnage oddly beautiful, while there was another that wanted me to puke everything that I've ever eaten. Weird. I shook my head and looked around, trying not to pay attention to the corpses. We were into an interrogation room, a proper one, I mean. While there were some interesting devices to help untie one's tongue, there was a lot of gadgets meant to tell if someone was lying. Granted, most of them were rather crudely made and quite old, but if my training was correct, they should have been rather effective despite that. However, it was clear that the room hadn't been used for its original purpose lately. There were 2 men and a woman strapped into chairs who were methodically torn apart. Considering that most, if not all, of the lie detectors appeared to be trashed, and not by the Marines, I doubted that the point had been gathering information. No, the fucking traitors had had their fun with the Inquisitor's retinue. At least one of them, I mentally amended. The closest man still had pieces of his jacket left, and while it was soaked with dried blood, a stylized eye patch on the shoulder facing me was clearly visible. "That doesn't bode well for the Lord Inquisitor," Antaeus stated. "Not at all." I nodded and averted my eyes from the torn mess that once was a human face. The man who should have been one of my colleagues had been tortured to death. "You all have cameras in the helmets recording this, right?" I asked the librarian. Somehow my training came up to the surface, making me look at the situation with professional detachment. I never thought I would be so glad that Sister Joachim's insane training methods, but you can't argue with results. I probably owed her and the rest of my teachers a lot, because I had the sneaking suspicion that if it wasn't for their efforts, I would be either dead or blubbering wreck by now. "Of course, it's SOP." Antaeus nodded. "Good. I would request copies of this segment at least once we're back. We'll have to confirm if these people were part of Lord Requista's retinue." "Naturally. Just don't touch the bodies, they might be trapped," the librarian added. "I won't. It's not like it would do them any good. They're with the Emperor now." I made the sign of the Aquila at the dead agent and turned my attention to Whent's men. One of the Astartes was busy cutting through a metal door with a power sword. The sound was surprisingly quiet after the last firefight. That or my hearing was shot. "Agent Vale, we're approaching the command center. However, enemy resistance is stiffening. We should take it in 5. The LT's voice came over my Voxcaster. Shortly after we got into the HQ, command came through for us and found a loyal Arbiter who had served in this building before being returned to the capital. He was able to give us a rough location of our objectives, the command center and detention cells. After that, we separated. Picos went with Whent's 2nd squad to neutralize the building's nerve center, while the rest of us headed towards the dungeon. "Good. Carry on," I answered. A solid clang sounded a few seconds later. The sword-wielding Astartes kicked the door he had been working on, and a massive piece of it flew down the corridor. "Paths open," the Marine declared, sheathed his blade and pulled out a bolter. "Lead the way, my lords," I waved at the Astartes. "Go, we've wasted too much time already," Antaeus added. The Marines pointedly ignored me, gave a nod to the librarian, and vanished one after another down the corridor. A squad of mowed-down traitors later, we were carefully descending through a tight stairwell, which was barely able to take the weight of the Marines. The comparatively flimsy metal it was made of groaned with every step they made, yet it held. It was a good thing that we descended two at a time, with the rest providing cover or simply staying out of the way, because I doubt that it would have held me too, much less a third Astartes. The damn weight was nerve-wracking too. This place had ambush practically written all over it. Even crazed cultists would have recognized it as a prime killing ground. Yet no enemy materialized. No mines or improvised explosives, no traps. That didn't bode well at all. At best, we were going to find empty cells or just corpses, because I doubted that the traitors were dumb enough to leave a live Inquisitor, no matter their condition, for us to find. Still, we reached the bottom without incident. If you don't count the fact that the warp simply cut off just behind the door that was now facing us. Even with my psychic senses clamped shut, I could feel a void, an emptiness that made me feel sick. "We just breached the CP. Casualties acceptable," Picos announced while the Astartes were preparing to cut through the door. "Outstanding, Lieutenant. Any idea if you can patch into building security?" "One of the Space Marines is working on it." "I can confirm," Antaeus announced. "The door should be opened in a few seconds." That's the first good news I got since arriving here. "So we must be ready for a really bad one," the librarian added. Little did we know what was happening right now a few hundred kilometers from here, and it was pretty fucking bad. The door quietly retracted into the floor, revealing an empty guard station. "Any sight of resistance?" I asked. Antaeus had to order the same info before we got an answer. There were still 2 short platoons in the building near the command center, though they were busy making themselves scarce. As far as the cameras and sensors were concerned, there were just a handful of still-alive prisoners with us down here. An icy ball formed in the pit of my stomach. To say that I had a bad feeling would be a charming understatement. The Astartes led the way, and we descended one more level until we reached the cells themselves. "Sir, you many want to see this." Went, who led the way, spoke. His squad took a step to the side, allowing us to pass. Went used his gun to point at a cell to the right. "A present for the Corpse Emperor's servants." That was written with drying blood on the cell's door. "Sweep for explosives and then carefully open the door," Antaeus ordered. "You squishies better take cover out of the cell block." "You heard the Lord Librarian," I snapped and made myself scarce. My shadows didn't need prompting and followed suit. "It's clear," Antaeus shouted a minute later in clearly affronted voice. Obviously, he too found the lack of traps and resistance insulting, or just a bad omen for the things to come. Yet another great opportunity to screw us over wasted. The fuck was going on here? "You better come here now, Agent Vale," the librarian spoke formally. Fuck. I sprinted down the corridor. That wasn't going to be good, like at all. Damn right I was. Halfway there, I could smell the rot and stench of body fluids. The Marines who were gathered around the cell door made me way without prompting this time. The first thing I saw was Went, who was actually standing at attention just inside the cell. Next to him, Antaeus was on one knee, towering over. My mind refused to comprehend what exactly I was seeing. For a moment I thought that it was a pile of bloody rags used to mop up some bloody mess. I blinked and shook my head. That had once been a man. Now it was a head with most of its flesh flayed attached to what might have been a human torso at one point. "Wah, oo, zoo, lug," the mutilated corpse somehow wheezed. "Fuck me with a baneblade." The poor fucking bastard was somehow still alive. I gave him a closer look, something that I immediately regretted. Most of his flesh was gone, all black and rotting with infection. The only thing that still kept him alive were the bionic implants I could see in his torso. "Lord Inquisitor Requista," I stated. It was barely recognizable, but if I squinted right, What was left of the face looked like the picture I got with my orders. His single remaining bloodshot eye turned in my vague direction. Apparently he had enough left of his mind to recognize his name. That and chiding us for not getting here earlier. Tough bastard. If I had been through the same and somehow still alive, I knew I would have been driven insane by now. I'm Agent Vale, your new initiate. I spoke aloud, hoping that he could hear and understand me. You, late, Requista whispered through missing lips. I know. What else could I say? People, he rasped. I shook my head. Requista closed his eye and went still for a few moments. I honestly thought that he had passed into the Emperor's light, but then he shook with wet cough and looked back at me. Chaos. Ritual. The peninsual. His voice was barely a whisper, and it was weakening with every word. We know. Antius rumbled quietly. Our strike cruiser will be taking out the whole area shortly. Goo. Requista gave out a sigh that I chose to interpret as one of relief. Sir, the Blood Ravens Company deployed here, and the Imperial Guard have conflicting orders. There were already skirmishes between the two forces. We need higher authority to stop them from killing each other. I spoke in a loud and clear voice. Fuck it. The last thing the dying man needed was dealing with this shit. The whole situation made me furious almost to the point seeing red. Requista's eyes stared at me, as if asking what the fuck could he do about it. I averted my gaze. Rrrr. Roz. The Inquisitor's whisper was barely audible. What was that? Antius stood up and looked around. A moment later he knelt next to a pile of offal in the corner and pulled out a blood and gore-covered object. He found some kind of rag and hastily cleaned it up, before presenting it to Requista. The Inquisitor stared in his rosary for a long moment. His mutilated face twisted in something that should have been a smile, but in fact was a vision from hell itself. A burst of what sounded like binary came from his implants, and the rosary in Antea's paw glowed with soft golden light. Requista's eye turned and looked at me. V, Requista wheezed. Arc, ein, in, seat, veal. Somehow he managed to give me a firm nod. Bune, the Iratech, purge, Zeno, he rasped for a last time. His eye closed and Requista laid still. I just watched the mutilated corpse. I didn't know the man. I didn't know of him either. Just the fact that he was an Inquisitor and one of the toughest bastards that I was likely to ever meet. Yet, seeing him die here, like that, doing his duty with his dying breath, it changed something. It made me furious. It gave me a purpose. I straightened up and made the Aquila with my hands before giving a deep, respectful bow to the dead Inquisitor. Brother Sergeant Went, check the rest of the cells, see if there's anyone still alive in here. I spoke in a voice I didn't recognize. There was no doubt, no uncertainty, just a conviction that I wasn't going to fail Requista. I was going to fulfill his last will and cleanse this world from the traitors and Zeno polluting it, or die trying. I could do nothing less. You heard the Inquisitor, Antius snapped, letting cold fury lace his voice. Went rigid, but then saluted and got out. The librarian turned his attention to me and offered me the rosary. I carefully closed my gloved hand around it. Things like these, Antius whispered, they either make or break a man. I have high expectations of you, Lord Inquisitor. 7. Chapter 2, Parts 4 and 5. Chapter 2, Dawn of War. Part 4, Detention Center, Arbiter's HQ, Genova Town, Kronus. No pressure then. I chuckled mirthlessly. Stop the Adeptus Astartes and the Imperial Guard from killing each other, purge a world from multiple Xeno armies, not to forget the apparent chaos incursion too. I was so much over my head, it wasn't even funny. All in a day's work, Inquisitor. Antius spoke solemnly. Santos, incendiary grenade. I won't have Requista's body profaned even further. I ordered my bodyguard after leaving the cell. Sir, the stormtrooper spoke quietly and followed my order once Antius walked out. The soldier threw the grenade in and sealed the door, turning the cell into a crematorium. We have a live one here, one of the Space Marines announced aloud in an uneasy voice. I frowned. Whatever could give one of his kind a pause couldn't be a good thing for anyone. I gripped the handle of my sword and walked towards the Astartes. The man was standing next to a cell in the far end of the corridor. His bolter was pointing into its open door, though he didn't open fire. Went and another Marine interrupted their search and moved in to cover their brother. I could hear the stormtroopers taking positions behind me and Antaea's heavy footsteps following me. What new horror awaited us, I wondered. I walked past a Marine who had taken position to the left of the door and carefully glanced inside. I could see two figures in the twilight. One was a woman. Here, dead white eyes were staring sightlessly at the door. Her face was a frozen grimace, stretched by grey, taut skin. Another, much smaller figure was clutching the dead woman like a lifeline. A pair of empty green eyes were staring through us, looking at only the Emperor knows what. The kid was skin and bones, wrapped in a dirty dress that might have been red once upon a time. She was apparently left to starve to death with the corpse of her young mother or older sister. Still, as fucked up as that was, it didn't explain why the Astartes was feeling uneasy. Undoubtedly, he had seen things that were much more fucked up, like what was done to Requista and his people. Antaeus stopped behind me and looked over my head. Then he hissed, "Can someone enlighten me? Is she possessed or something?" I asked warily. My hand clutched the hilt of my chainsword, and I prepared for action. "Can't you feel it?" The librarian sounded incredulous. "The hell? Now that I think about it. Yeah, there was no trace of the warp that I could sense, like it was never there. It was actually soothing." I said so aloud, too. "She's a pariah." Antaeus hissed again. That gave me pause. As a psyker, her very presence should be screaming, "Kill me now," getting worse the closer the kid was. Instead, there was nothing. "Are you sure?" I frowned. "I feel nothing that suggests she's a pariah or a blank, though I haven't been close to one before." "Very sure." Antaeus growled and took a step back. I'm sure that I heard a sigh of relief coming from him. "That's weird." I shrugged. "But potentially useful with Chaos and Eldar around." "You want to use her?" the librarian asked. "Well, I'm certainly not leaving her here, since she's not possessed or otherwise corrupted. Though a medical scan for nasty surprises will be in order, I think. You're sure she's not a demon host or something?" "Very. I've been close to blanks and a pariah before. The feeling's unmistakable." "How in the Emperor's name can you stand being so close to her?" Antaeus exclaimed. "No idea. I'm weird like that." I shrugged. "Hi there." I smiled and waved at the kid, who didn't react like at all. Damn it, I wasn't a therapist or something. The little training I got for similar situations was going to be counterproductive in this case, I thought. Santos, a ration bar and canteen. Cool picos to have a female trooper waiting us at the entrance. Our new friend might react better to a woman. Trying to get the girl out of her funk with offer of food and water didn't work. She simply wasn't here and didn't really react when I carefully pulled the corpse of her relative from her hands and picked her up. Totally catatonic, or whatever the scientific term was. I growled. Just another life destroyed by the damn traitors, as if I needed another reason to burn them all. Soon enough, we were back at the entrance, after pausing for a few moments to burn the bodies of Requista's team too. We faced no resistance. The remaining traitorous arbiters were either busy running or got ran down by the guardsmen and Astartes squad working with them. "What's the plan, Lord Inquisitor?" Antaeus asked after I handed the girl to a short, grizzled corporal who rushed her out towards the waiting chimeras. "You thought what you're going to do, I hope?" Antaeus appeared next to me. "Go back to the capital and put an end to this damn mess. We have enough problems without trying to kill each other too." I dearly hoped that Captain Thule was going to recognize my new authority and rein in his Astartes. We had whole armies of Xeno to deal with. Fighting among ourselves was going to doom us and every human on Kronus. Good, the librarian muttered. "Do you think Thule will challenge your chapter master's orders on my say-so?" I asked. Antaeus was silent for a long moment. "I believe so. However, there are some of my brothers that would be mightily displeased by such a turn of events." "How displeased?" "That remains to be seen. Antaeus trailed off. The Astartes, who was standing just beyond the effective boundary of the girl's disruption effect, stiffened. His head snapped up towards the plateau above the town. "By the Emperor," the librarian whispered, turned around and stared. The sky was tearing apart as huge wisps of purple energy were rising from somewhere behind the horizon. Lances of blinding light descended from the heavens, likely the Space Marine strike cruiser unleashing its weapons on the far side of the peninsula. I had the sinking feeling that it was going to be too little too late. The ground shook under our feet, a warm, wet wind started blowing in our faces. It carried a faint smell of decay. I felt a faint pressure in my head, but it was a distant thing that was failed to find a purchase. I shuddered and took a step towards the chimera with the kid we retrieved. The pressure suddenly vanished, and I let out a sigh of relief. Whatever it wasn't good for my health. I knew that much. We need to leave. Now. Antaeus rasped. He stumbled towards the waiting chimeras and straightened up once he got closer. I've never been a witness to a warp storm being born. The librarian groaned. Above us, the tendrils of warp energy continued to race towards space. Lieutenant, we need to get the fuck out of here yesterday. Make your way to the chimeras on the double, and don't stop for anything. Move it, I shouted in my vox. Affirmative. What's the situation? We're feeling something weird. A warp storm and something that looks like chaos incursion. Shit, we're pulling out now, the LT informed me. Sergeant, defensive positions, be ready for anything. I ordered the NCO left to oversee our ride back home. Yes, sir, the aging man said, and started shouting orders. Sir, what are the odds that we'll be able to pull out without incident? I asked Antaeus. The librarian didn't answer, and instead just stared at the boiling mass of warp energy that was starting to gather in high orbit. Part 5. Arbiter's HQ, Genova Town, Kronus. It took 5 nerve-wracking minutes for the rest of the platoon and Wentz Marines to reach us. The news from orbit weren't good. The growing warp storm was threatening to cut us off from reinforcements if it didn't stabilize soon. Even worse, the captain of the strike cruiser told Antaeus that the orbital strike appeared to be unsuccessful. Before warp-derived disturbances blanketed their sensors with static and other, less pleasant things, the Astartes in orbit saw a chaos gate forming and a lot of traitor forces pouring through. We had elements of a traitor legion on site, which meant that unless we all cleaned up our act, we were dead. If we were lucky. My job just got that much more important, and I still had no real idea how to do it, besides rely on my newfound authority and pray to the Emperor that it would be enough. I spent the last few minutes trying to plan a course of action that wasn't going to needlessly get people killed, and reached the predictable conclusion that I simply lacked the experience to do so. I was supposed to be training how to be a proper little inquisitorial agent. Not the real thing, damn it. Predictably, we didn't get out without accident. It was that kind of day. Picos just emerged from the main entrance, followed by her soldiers, more than a few of whom were carrying wounded, when I could feel static electricity building in the air. A loud whining followed by a snap crack, and a flash of light erupted from the edge of the null field surrounding the chimeras. Chunks of steaming meat and glowing armor exploded outwards and started raining all over the plaza. A dozen or so rapid flashes followed, deploying huge men randomly just beyond the null field. Most of them wore furs and leathers, though that didn't make their wicked chain swords and axes any less lethal. The small warband was led by a pair of even larger traitor marines, who were armored from head to toe and carrying very large guns. I stared at the madmen who risked teleporting while a warp storm was being born. For a moment, they were surrounded by a corona of dissipating warp energy, which almost immediately discharged into the surrounding area. My training kicked in just as they gave blood-curdling war cries and charged us with no care for their own well-being. Our Astartes were already reacting, aiming at the madmen. However, they concentrated on the major threat, the traitor marines, which gave a chance to the berserkers to close in. I drew my weapons and opened fire at the closest madmen. The chimera next to me was lucky. Its gunner was pointing a heavy bolter in the general direction of the enemy and immediately opened up, blowing a pair of heretics into bloody gore. Antaeus, who was under the null field, wasted no time and charged a nearby maniac, who was wielding a pair of chain axes, while the rest of the Marines were busy riddling their traitorous brethren with bolter shells. We would have emerged from this ill-timed attack mostly unscratched if it wasn't for one nasty fact. 4 of the madmen appeared almost on top of Picos and her people. The guardsmen wasted no time in opening fire, however they managed to down only 2 berserkers, before the rest were within melee range and started swinging. I saw that from the corner of my eye, and then I was too busy to pay any more attention to anything but Giant barreling towards me. I shot him twice in the chest, which only ignited the furs he was wearing, revealing that he had some kind of armor underneath. My shots only pissed him off. He roared and swung a huge 2-handed axe at me, intent on splitting me in 2. I jumped aside in the last moment, feeling the displaced air as the mighty cleave passed a few centimeters from my left shoulder. I wasted no time and retaliated with an ill-aimed swipe. The man moved with a surprising agility and almost got out of range. The adamantine teeth of my blade caught his biceps and tore through the muscle, leaving an ugly gash in his left hand. That didn't slow him down in the slightest. He roared in rage and pain and swung his axe again, as if it was a child's toy instead of a huge weapon that had to weigh at least 20 kilograms. All I could do was to jump back and pray. The swipe did miss me, but it caught the side of my sword and tore it from my hand. I spat a curse and backpedaled. I raised my las pistol and started shooting at the man's head. I missed as he gave me an ugly smile and charged straight at me. I stumbled at something and fell on my arse, which left me an easy target. I had just enough time to take a hasty shot and curse my luck, before the madman was towering above me. Then his bloodthirsty grin and the head it was attached to were replaced by pink steam. The headless corpse swung on its feet for a couple of seconds, then it started slowly toppling towards me. "Fuck my luck," I hissed and rolled away. "You all right, sir?" Santos was next to me a moment later, offering me a hand. "Thanks," I muttered. "Good fellas, saving my life like that. I think I was going to keep them." I looked around, the enemy done in, though we didn't emerge unscratched. The first casualty I saw was one of the Astartes. His left arm hanged useless, and the arm was missing everything below the elbow. Fuck, those traitors managed at least on shot more or less on target, even when 2 squads were busy emptying their bolters in them. I was suddenly very glad that I wasn't faced with a real traitor marine and had to content with just an initiate at worst. And he almost took my head too, the wanker. I shuddered at the thought of how close to dying I got. "Emperor damned heretics," I muttered, and looked back at where Picos was. Fuck. The LT was all right, though I couldn't say the same for her people. Those bastards that hit them apparently managed to cut down at least half a dozen guardsmen before being shot to pieces, almost literally. The maniacs had so many cauterized holes in them that it was a miracle that they were more or less in one piece. "Get the wounded on the chimeras and let's move on before they hit us again," I ordered. The poor bastards gutted by those heretics weren't among the wounded. The chain weapons had killed everyone they hit. I hoped that this was just a raid of opportunity or something, because otherwise we may not make it back. If we were hit by a dozen traitor marines instead, most of us would be gone. I had no doubt about that. The only good news was that we got a few minutes to load everyone, with the Astartes taking a ride on the roofs, then left without being attacked again. The Emperor only knew if we could make it to friendly-held territory without being hit again. 8. Chapter 2, Part 6. Chapter 2, Dawn of War. Part 6, 6 hours later, Imperial Guard Column, en route to Victory Bay. Multiple contacts, 6 o'clock. One of Went's Marines spoke in the platoon's general Voxnet. "Confirmed. Aircars and bikes, approaching fast. From the direction of Genova and the Chaos incursion that infested the peninsula. At least they weren't in position to cut off our way. Not yet." "Of course it wouldn't be that easy," I grumbled. "Get us moving as fast as practical, check if someone is free to provide some air support and prepare for battle." I spoke in my Vox, trying very hard to keep the resignation out of my voice. There was a small part of me that hoped that we would get back without incident. I should have known better. "Camera feeds?" I asked the driver, a young corporal called Oren. Surprisingly, the IG regiment sent to pacify Kronus was equipped with top-of-the-line kit, including some impressive networking compared to what most of the Guard had to work with. That included cameras in all vehicles and automated turrets on most chimeras, sparing a soldier the need to expose themselves to use the heavy weapon mounted on top. There were only 2 such machines attached to the platoon, and on the scramble to get away from Genova, I didn't end in one of them. At least the LT and the stray I picked up were a bit safer than the rest of us. On the bright side, there were still cameras on my ride, allowing me to see what was approaching once I went next to the driver. Behind us, there was a small cloud of vehicles, air cars, bikes, and even 2 buses of all things. It was no surprise that they were able to overtake us. While the Chimeras were fast for tracked APCs, they had nothing on civilian skimmers that didn't need to mount much in the way of armor. Just enough to maybe keep a rich idiot alive if they crashed into something. The big question was what they were armed with, because a few decent missile launchers could easily ruin our day. "They're in range, engaging." A Marine announced over the Vox an instant before I could hear bolters opening up. Single shots, aimed fire. The enemy was still kilometers away, practically far beyond small arms' effective range, against human-sized targets. Apparently for Space Marines with all their enhancements and whatever help their armor could provide, that wasn't true. They were followed by our heavy weapons, speaking moments later. Just a few seconds after the Astartes opened fire, an air car fell out of formation, then crashed near the road. Despite what a movie might imply, the expected fireball didn't materialize, so the Prometheum tank survived the impact. A biker lost his head next, and his ride slammed into the back of a red air car. This time, we were rewarded with a nice blue-tinted explosion as the 2 vehicles immolated themselves. The ensuing blast wave and shrapnel scattered the nearby traitors and even downed a few air cars. The swarm spread out and continued to approach undeterred by the losses. The cameras caught dull flashes appearing all around the enemy machines as their occupants started firing wildly our way. At this range, they had to be very lucky to hit anything, yet given the amount of ordnance coming our way, they were bound to. A dull clang announced some kind of round ricocheting from the side of our Chimera. Yep, even fucking traitors spraying and praying could get lucky. A few seconds later, our gunner let loose a long burst of bolter fire. The heavy round flew true and ripped open one of the closest air cars, splattering its occupants in the process. Autocannons, grenades, and heavy bolters were taking their toll upon the approaching swarm. A saner opponent would have broken off, given the death toll that our heavy weapons and Marines were inflicting. Yet those were chaos-aligned traitors. Sanity was something that other people did. Hell, a lot of them probably were glad to die for whatever foul thing they worshipped. The worst thing was that I was a spectator. There were no orders to give, no way to actively fight right now. Oh, we could stop, dismount, and give the bastards a good fight. However, that might allow for something actually nasty to catch up, and there was still no word on air support. Besides, doing so would make us easier targets for ramming. It took them a couple of minutes to get close enough that their wildfire started hitting our rides at regular intervals. The Astartes didn't seem to mind. Stubbers and lasguns weren't a big threat for their armor. However, the same couldn't be said about our gunners. "Eli's down," someone shouted over the Vox. "Pull her down and take the gun. Medic," Picos ordered. About 2/3 of the swarm was down when they were about to overtake us. The Marines and gunners did a great job, but there were simply too many of the bastards to take out with our firepower. Not before they reached us, at least. "Get off the road and evasive," I snapped. I really didn't like the way the leading bastards were angling their vehicles towards us, and considering that their shooting was really just an inconvenience. "My eyes!" our gunner screamed, and the roar of his bolter ceased. "Help me pull him down," I snapped and stopped watching the battle. I just had to think that, didn't I? I should have known better. A pair of guardsmen rushed to my aid, and within seconds we had the poor bastards back inside the vehicle. We laid him on the floor, and the 2 men who helped me started pulling out medpacks. I glanced at the rest of the troopers with us. All were injured to one extent or another, though most were walking wounded. Fuck it. I hated being useless anyway. I pushed my shoulders through the gunner's hatch and took a hold of the bolter just as our driver made a sharp turn, making me slam my ribs on a sharp edge. Fortunately, my armor blunted most of the impact, leaving me with only a nasty bruise. I took a moment to get my bearings and make sure that I didn't accidentally shoot one of the Marines riding on the ceiling. What I saw was pure chaos, pun intended. There were bikes and air cars doing their best to ram our wildly evading chimeras, while others flew close in to provide covering fire. Others instead were doing their best to board us, which was sheer insanity considering that we had a pair of Astartes on top of each APC. In the Emperor's name, die. I heard Antaeus's voice rise from nearby and glanced to the left. The librarian was driving his bike with one hand while shooting over his shoulder with the other. Somehow he wasn't crashing even though he was unable to use his psyker powers to help find a safe route. He was hitting things too. I saw him rip through a bike that flew next to the Chimera behind us. Bolter rounds blew apart the chest of its leather-clad driver, while his buddy, a naked woman, was jumping too on the Chimera. The bike flew out of control a moment before the heretic could properly leap, and she bounced from the side skirt of the APC, then harmlessly blew up behind the speeding armored vehicles. "Beware, suicide bombers," I shouted in my vox. That image made me stop gawking at the insanity surrounding me, and I gripped the heavy bolter. It took me a moment to line up a target, an air car that was diving at the Chimera behind us, and opened fire. My first burst went high, just a round or two clipped the trunk, doing no real damage. I cursed while correcting my aim and let loose. Heavy rounds stitched through the middle of the diving car and detonated, tearing it in two. The front slammed into the road behind us and crumbled like a tin can under tank treads, while the back blew up spectacularly a moment after slamming into a tree. That was fucking awesome. A well-aimed burst pinged from the armor around my bolter. I tried to make myself as small target as possible, all the while doing my best to fend off the maniacs. Despite our best efforts, they just kept coming. I saw a pair of cultists jumping on top of a Chimera that had to slow down to avoid a ditch. The Marines on top trivially threw the bastards away before they exploded in a shower of gore. An aircar slammed in the back of the last APC, only to crumble when whatever it was made of was found lacking compared to the armor. Then one of the buses was almost on top of us. The madman driving turned it to the side, somehow making the vehicle drift in mid-air. For a heartbeat I thought that the driver fucked up, but then the side aligned with our Chimera, revealing at least 20 people with guns pointing our way. "Fuck," I shouted and let loose, emptying the belt into the bus. The Marines did the same, burning through what was left in their magazines in moments. Our combined fire ripped the bus open, spilling people and pieces of people on the ground. Yet the Emperor-damned cultists didn't care and opened fire with everything they got. Slugs and lass bolts slammed into the top of our Chimera, either bouncing off or heating the armor. The Marines simply shrugged the fire and reloaded, though the one to my right first pulled out a grenade and threw it in the bus, which was threatening to roll in the air and fall on the last APC. The driver of the rearguard Chimera made the engine scream and somehow squeezed off just a bit more speed. The grenade flew in the bus, landing just behind the driver and blew up, simply disintegrating the front third of the machine. The rest spun out of control and slammed into a patch of threes beside the road, where it flew apart. "I need ammo," I shouted to the troopers below me as I did my best to detach the empty belt. Let me tell you, reloading a heavy bolter on top of Chimera, busy evading kamikazes, was pure brass-platted bitch. One cursed by the Emperor himself to boot. Having fucking cultists trying to blow my head off didn't help either. At least the Marines next to me didn't arrange an accident that would have left Thule free to take out the Imperial Guard too. I was finally able to reload and take a note of what the hell was happening around us, when the never-sufficiently damned cultists got lucky. The second bus, which had been hanging back, accelerated behind a wall made of the most remaining aircars. It chose the time well, because apparently all our heavy weapons ran out of ammo in just about the same time, which was a pure fuck-up on our side. The Marines did their best, as well as the few guardsmen who had clear fire lanes from the firing ports in the Chimeras. I opened fire too, ripping a pair of aircars to pieces. It wasn't enough. We took down about 2/3 of the remaining cars when the bus drove through two of its buddies, literally slamming them out of the air. I'm sure I saw at least 2 Marines shredding the driver, making the machine lose control, but it was too late. It slammed in the back of the last Chimera, though at least the Astartes ridding that APC managed to jump out just in time. The impact tore apart the bus, however, the damage was done. The Chimera was sent skidding into a low boulder. It hit hard, at the wrong angle, and the whole APC went airborne for a few seconds before slamming into the ground and rolling a few times until it laid resting on its ceiling. "We lost a chimera. Circle around and prepare to dismount," I ordered, and opened fire at the remaining traitors. "Belay that. Continue driving towards Victory Bay," Pico shouted, giving me pause. She knew better than to disobey an Inquisitor, and she didn't strike me as a woman who would just leave 8 of her people behind. "Lieutenant, explain yourself," I growled in the Vox. "I just got word from HQ. Enemy bombers are vectoring on our position. The General sent interceptors our way, but they won't reach us in time unless we keep driving." I glared at the traitors. What little air cars they had remaining were breaking off and heading towards the crashed Chimera, just as the pair of dismounted Astartes did. We were in the open, with no cover to speak of in sight. If a bomber or two caught us here, we were toast. "You heard the LT. Once the cap is in place, we're coming back," I growled in the Vox, though I didn't really believe it. Somehow, I had trouble believing that we would find anything but corpses, if we could get back in the first place. 9. Chapter 2, Parts 7 and 8. Chapter 2, Dawn of War, Part 7, Broadsword 1-1. Kronus 51st Lightning Interceptor Squadron. Kronus. Broadsword Actual, Overwatch Wilco. Interceptor bomber flight vectoring towards friendly convoy. Coordinates. Flight Lieutenant Erica Astra pulled her control stick and banked to the east. Her agile fighter obeyed like an eager puppy and easily settled into a new course. Behind her, the rest of the squadron followed suit, forming into a wedge formation. Broadsword 2, Broadsword Actual, confirm orders. Erica's XO, Lieutenant Korolev, asked over the Vox. It wasn't like the Victory Bay's local to question orders, any orders. Yet the flight lieutenant could understand his concern. She shared it. The new orders carried them to the east, straight at the source of the chaos sorcery that dominated the skies in the form of a purple wound in reality itself. The Emperor-damned thing was connected to the ground via pulsing tentacle made of wriggling energy that made it painful to look in that direction. The warp storm in orbit above that location, an abomination made of unspeakable things, didn't help either. Yet the 51st had their orders. To disobey was treason, and that had only one outcome. Broadsword Actual, Broadsword 2, orders confirmed. We're to intercept enemy bombers and provide cap for a ground convoy. Erica repeated the orders, which came straight from the General. May the Emperor watch over our souls. Broadsword 3, Lieutenant Orlin Kovac, muttered a prayer over the Vox. The Emperor protects. Erica answered just as quietly. She looked at her instruments, at the side of the cockpit, just so she didn't have to stare at the purple tendrils of energy undulating over the horizon. Broadsword flight, don't look straight at whatever is happening over the Deimos Peninsula, the flight lieutenant ordered. She didn't think that her men were dumb enough to stare into that madness, but she wanted to make sure. Erica started muttering prayers to soothe her nerves and keep her mind off what was happening to her world, while her eyes never left the instruments. It didn't really help. Until just a few years ago, the Tau were little more than peaceful traders, before they started shipping more and more hardware and troops. About the same time, more people began to adopt their culture and views, something that the imperial authorities saw as what it was, an attempt to subvert the emperor's rule. That's when everything started going to hell. The unrest started growing. A few PDF units sided with the Tau, which would have sparkled a war if it wasn't for an orc rock crashing near the blue-skinned settlements and focusing everyone's attention on the green menace. Then things went weird. Disappearances, traces of cult activity, rumors of Eldar sightings. If all that wasn't enough, the Imperial Guard, shortly followed by the Adeptus Astartes, arrived, and that sparkled the conflict. Everyone knew it was coming. Now there was chaos too, threatening not only body but soul. The flight was just a few minutes of the target area when the sensor suite of the Lightning whined, announcing high-energy disturbance that made it hard to detect anything. Broadsword flight, Broadsword Actual. Are you experiencing Auspex disturbances? Broadsword 2. Detection range is at 50% and rapidly decreasing. Broadsword 3. Mine just fell to 25% and it's not moving from there. Broadsword Actual, Overwatch. Be advised, We're experiencing interference. Auspex detection range just fell to 1/3. Please advise on enemy location. Erica informed command. Overwatch, broadsword actual. Be advised, we're detecting 4 boogies vectoring on the convoy. Course. As command gave her the vector and distance of the enemy, Erica typed it into the flight cogitator. 4 blinking red dots appeared on her sensor screen, showing the estimated locations of the enemy. Flight profile and sensor sweeps estimate 4 Marauder bombers, Overwatch declared. Affirmative. Target is 4 Marauders. Erica answered. Good hunting, broadsword actual. Overwatch out. A few minutes and multiple small course corrections later, Erica finally got the enemy on sensors. The bombers' targets too. The later were hard to miss when they were the only moving thing on the ground. All broadswords hit the afterburners and engage at will, Erica ordered as her flight screamed far above the guard convoy. The bombers were almost in effective range. They would have had a clear shot even earlier if it wasn't for the disturbance that all but guaranteed a visual range dogfight. At least that wasn't too big a problem this time. Broadsword flight had already expended their missiles while dueling with Tau fighters for air superiority in the vicinity of Victory Bay. The enemy detected them almost at the same time and split. 2 bombers dived while the rest pulled up. Broadsword flight, broadsword actual. I'm taking the low pair. Eliminate the rest and reinforce. Affirmative. Wilco, the Emperor protects. The flight lieutenant put her fighter into a sharp dive. This was going to be tricky. Ideally, she would be able to take out both bombers on the first pass. However, that wasn't something she could count on. If even one of the traitors managed to lock on the convoy, they would be able to kill it. Erica grit her teeth when her flight suit tightened around her as she sped down and the gravities affecting her started mounting. Soon enough, the targeting cogitator gave a pleased beep as it locked on the leading bomber. Erica smiled viciously and pressed the trigger. Her wingtip-mounted lance cannons spoke, and a pair of blinding beams of coherent light bore through the air. One down, the flight lieutenant muttered after her target vanished from the sensors. She looked up from the instruments at the fast-approaching bomber she was flying at. The enemy craft lit up as its autocannons and bolters opened up in an attempt to swat her out of the sky. Erica answered with a burst of her own autocannon, which unfortunately went wide. The enemy's return fire became more accurate and bolter rounds pinged off her armored wings, the tiny explosions making her plane shake. Erica glanced at the charge. Just a few more seconds, and she could fire her primary weapon again. She sent another burst of shells at the bomber, missing again as it banked right. A ping announced that lance cannons were up, and Erica pressed the trigger. The ponderous bomber had no prayer of evading this salvo, not at practically point-blank range. 2 lances of boiling energy speared the enemy craft just in front of the left wing, slicing it open as its own momentum drove it through the beams. Then the ordnance cooked off, and the bomber disappeared in the middle of a colossal explosion. Broadsword flight, broadsword 1. Sound up. Erica ordered and pushed her lighting into a steep climb. Broadsword 2, scratch 1 boogie. Broadsword 3, the heretics are dead. Good, we're on cap until the convoy is in friendly territory. Broadsword actual, overwatch, enemy bombers killed. Broadsword flight is providing escort for the convoy, over. Overwatch, broadsword actual. Well done, carry on. We'll keep an eye for enemy flyers, over. Erica glanced at the convoy speeding on the highway below. She hoped that it carried something important enough to justify pulling her squadron out of the furball above the capital. To her utter astonishment and confusion, the convoy braked and started turning around. What in the Emperor's name? Broadsword actual, overwatch. The convoy is turning around, please advise. Erica hissed into the Vox. Overwatch, broadsword actual, wait 1. Erica was left fuming as the convoy of chimeras sped back towards the Deimos Peninsula. Overwatch, broadsword actual. The convoy is going back to retrieve a pair of stranded Adeptus Astartes. Provide cap. Will vector support when available, over. Why did the guardsmen went back to retrieve the same maniacs who had been accidentally killing them for the better part of 2 weeks? What did she do? Offend the Emperor himself or something to deserve dealing with this? Part 8. Command Center, Imperial Guard Base, Final Liberation, Victory Bay, Kronus. The dimly lit room buzzed with chatter coming from all over the jagged front lines surrounding the capital. Most of the light came from a pair of small hololiths, courtesy to the Magos in charge of all things Mechanicus, attached to General Alexander's command, and multiple screens attached to portable consoles. Orcs massing all across the line, large armor formations screened by mobs of infantry. Eldar units skirmishing with the Astartes in sectors. Tau armored elements signed. All contact with the Thur Ablis plateau has been lost along with the surrounded areas. Scout units report fog and green lighting in the distance. Those regions reported people vanishing too. We lost communications. The general remained outwardly impassive. He had to project the proper image of calm and control to all his subordinates after all. Inside, however, he was deeply concerned. The clashes with the Adeptus Astartes caused a lot of damage, though admittedly it was more morale than material. Even now, all his people found it very hard to trust the Emperor's Angels of Death. When by all means it should have been the opposite, the Space Marines should have been their salvation. Instead, it was only because that suicidal mission to retrieve the Inquisitor that the Imperial forces planetside finally ceased shooting at each other to concentrate on the real enemy, and there was no lack of bastards ready to despoil this world. General, a new figure silently entered the command post. We're done. Both the librarians and I agree. There is no trace of corruption. They won't taste the Emperor's mercy today. The chief psyker attached to his army reported, You have my thanks, Jordan. I merely did my duty, General. The consecrated psyker shrugged lightly and moved to lean on a nearby wall. You should expect company soon. The Inquisitor and the librarian. He seems determined to shadow our new Inquisitor for the foreseeable future. A hint of approval sneaked in the psyker's voice. Did you see something? Alexander's piercing eyes focused on Jordan. The tarot hints at possibilities, General. He might be important, or perhaps he already did what he was meant to when he stopped the regrettable misunderstanding. Not too soon. If the Imperial forces were still busy shooting at each other, Alexander wouldn't bet on them being able to withstand the coming storm. There were over 300,000 orcs expected to hit the defensive lines in force shortly after dawn. The Eldar were wreaking havoc behind the lines with Astartes kill teams hunting them down, who knew what the other Xenos intended to do right now, and if all that wasn't bad enough, there was confirmed chaos incursion and that unknown phenomena at the plateau. Colonel Amundsen, concentrate our artillery units against the orcs. I want them covered, both from the air and against Xeno deep strikes. We will deploy a third of our special forces on overwatch there. Colonel Nicholas, half the armor reserve is to prepare to plug any holes the orcs manage to punch in the front. We can't afford to deploy more infantry on that front, not when I need the rest of the army to keep the capital secure and watch for chaos incursions. It will fall to the Blood Ravens to act as a hammer with us being the anvil. The plan is simple, create as big a cauldron as possible for the orcs. They will flock where the fighting is fiercest. Once they commit their armor formations, I want them hammered. Artillery, airstrikes, even orbital support if available, without killing us as well. The primary objective is to use the battle as a bait for the war boss. We need to kill the bastard. At the very least, that will shatter the orcs as a coherent force and buy us time to deal with the larger threats before eradicating as many of the green menace as practical. A commotion came from the entrance, one that very soon revealed itself to be the Lord Inquisitor and his librarian companion. It was clear that the elite soldiers guarding the CP weren't too keen on letting the Astartes in. However, thankfully they didn't irritate the Inquisitor too much. General Alexander. The young Inquisitor looked like a death warmed over but otherwise intact. Lord Inquisitor. The general bowed. It never paid to antagonize their kind, even if this one appeared to be unusually amiable. I trust that there will be no more misunderstandings. For what is worth, Brother Captain Thule promised there will be no more friendly fire accidents. It will be up to higher authority to determine who will take custody of Kronus once we've secured it. The Inquisitor was an optimist then, something they all would need in the days and weeks to come. I heard the same thing, from your mouth to the Emperor's ears. Alexander made the sign of the Aquila. So say we all. Can someone bring me up to speed on the strategic situation? The general left one of his aides to summarize it briefly while he continued deploying his reserve units in the face of the confirmed chaos presence. That's less than ideal. The Inquisitor scowled. While an understatement of their current predicament, the statement was to the point. You're right, General. We need to shatter the orcs as soon as possible. With them swarming, we can't afford to focus properly on the nastier threats. Their war boss needs to die. My thoughts exactly, my lord. The general nodded. Atheus, can your battle barge be on station above the capital tomorrow at noon? By then we should be fully engaged with the orcs. The Lord Inquisitor asked. It should be possible. The Bloodraven tilted his head, obviously thinking. Once we've confirmed the war boss presence on the front, we should request orbital support. Burn as many of the orcs' rear lines as practical without taking us out as well. That should cut off the war boss from immediate reinforcements and allow us to counterattack, encircle, and eliminate him. Ideally, we'll take it from orbit. However, if we aren't that lucky, a series or precise orbital strikes should give us a window of opportunity that won't require to break a large part of the general's army in the process. It would be appreciated if your brothers can deep strike a kill team from orbit to assist us as well. We'll lead the operation to reassure everyone that we're all one big happy family fighting in the Emperor's name. That was actually prudent, while his people were professional and there were commissars around to ensure they stayed that way. General Alexander knew that even the Red Menaces were shaken over the Bloodraven's actions over the past weeks. If this was to work, they would need to work together, properly, instead of being busy watching each other backs for an expected backstab. Alexander had intended to personally lead the fight against the Orc warboss. However, an Inquisitor should be able to do so as well, and he would have better leverage against the Astartes. If it is all right, I will join you for this morning's excitement, my lord. Better safe than sorry after all. I'll appreciate it, General. Now let's make this outline into a proper plan.